Hello, everybody. Welcome to yet another edition of the Anthony Peake Consciousness Hour. This one I've been looking forward to for a very different reason to the other shows we've done in the past. And this is because we're going to be discussing fiction rather than fact, which is every other person we've had on. And our guest today is a guy called Mike Fiorito. And Mike waving there. And the thing is about Mike's work, Mike contacted me, I think, around about a year ago. I think it was last September when we were in contact. And he subsequently sent me a copy of his amazing collection of short stories, Falling from Trees. And I mean amazing. I cannot stress how much I enjoyed these stories. And indeed, I've now recently read the book for the fourth time. And every time I find nuances within it and fantastic pieces within it. And this is just absolutely wonderful. But what we're going to do is we've only got an hour this time. Normally we have 2 hours on the show, but we've only got an hour because Mike's got to shoot off and do something else. So what we're going to do is get straight into the show. And what I'm also planning to do, and Sarah and I were just discussing this before, is that what we think we might do going forward is have another wing of Consciousness Hour in that we will discuss books. So like a book club. So we let you guys know what the book is going to be about a month before. Then we all read the book. And then if we can get the author on board, we will. If it's a classic book that the author is no longer with us, we'll just discuss it. And then you can join in as well. So let us know if you like that as an idea. And I think what we will do is probably get Mike back sometime in the future when you've all had the opportunity to read Falling from Trees and indeed his new book when it comes out, which Mike has sent me an advance copy, and it's extraordinary as well in a very visceral sense. And we'll probably touch upon that book later on as well. But Mike, we were discussing earlier on about going straight in on this one. Yep. So can you tell us a little bit about how you came across my work and how our work resonates together? And then we can get into a discussion about just writing and the interests and coincidences here.
Yes, well, first of all, thank you both. Thank you, Sarah and Anthony, for having me on. I'm really honored. You guys have great guests. They're always interesting, so I feel like I'm in the pantheon with the great ones. So thank you. What was very strange, Anthony, is I had written Falling from Trees. And, I'm a voracious reader like you. I know you've read Falling from Trees 4 times. That's impressive. I don't think anyone in my family has read it, maybe once. I think it was the path that led me to it. I had bought Jeffrey Kripal's The Flip, short book, very good book. And it triggered my imagination, the playing with the ideas of, really what he's exploring is why does science ignore the unexplained, as you know. I then read a few other authors, and then I came upon the hidden universe. But it was really the hidden universe that kind of knocked me out because, yes, I was toying with exploring the limits of logic. But then I was reading the stories. You see my stories have telepathy in them. They have precognitive experiences. There's a lot of talk about synchronicity. And there were very specific scenes. The scene with your mother having, and I know you played with the term hallucination, having something, thinking it's something in the sky. What is it? Is it real? And there are a number of stories in like the Three Bridges, am I imagining it? Is it happening? Can both be true? This kind of notion, the idea of the entities that you called them, the Watchers, the jinns, and you see in Climbing Time, that story, which is almost like a poem. I think really this notion of I'm thinking about what is the potential for consciousness, what is the potential evolution of consciousness, and of course you're writing about Myron Dial. I became friends with Myron Dial, but then your whole body of work. You've written a book on Philip K. Dick. I'm a huge fan of Philip K. Dick. You wrote a book on Aldous Huxley. And all of these very odd synchronicities. Then when I'm talking to you on Facebook, and you said, I have your book open, and I'm pulling into a station that I always go to, the Three Bridges. And as I pick your book up, I see the Three Bridges. And then I just realized that there's just people you have that sync with. There's something going on that's inexplicable. And we had to develop that relationship and get to know each other.
So absolutely. I mean, that coincidence on Three Bridges, while I was reading the story Three Bridges, was one of those kind of moments in life where you go, this is weird beyond weird. And I'll give another example very quickly that happened to me a few years ago. I have a music player on my phone now. I have about 20,000 music tracks. Like yourself, I'm a huge music fan.
Yeah.
And I have it on random play. So there's 1 in 20,000 chance of any track coming up. And I was drawing into a station where I used to live up on Wirral, on Merseyside. And I'm drawing into this station, and the station's called Rock Ferry. As I draw into Rock Ferry, the Duffy song Rock Ferry comes on my headphones. Now, that kind of chance is beyond calculation. Now, is it just that we notice these things? I don't believe it is. I think it's significant. And I think as creative people, it seems there's a link between the world around us, as if we're anticipating the stories. Mm-hmm. Would you agree, that you think that you're mining your own future for the stories?
After I read a few of your books, I started to look at really all of my writing in a way, the hated ones. In a way, I was writing it as I was living it, in a way. And there is that feeling of time loop, and as if I was sending the stories to myself in the future. And really all of my books, you can find that kind of the playing with time, the transposing myself into the future and into the past. So yeah, I think that if you're listening and if you're sensitive, there's magic around us to be reckoned and to pay attention to. It blows my mind that people will just not be gripped, not be curious. As I think you and I both agree, I'm a scientific person. I read your writing. I've listened to many of your programs. You're very scientific. Science isn't enough. It's just not enough. Logic is key. It's important. It's a great instrument, a tool. Science and technology they're so compelling that we listen to them only. And, there are people that have gifts of precognitive capability. They're oracles in some ways. And sometimes they don't even know it.
Yeah, it's true, isn't it? We miss the magic around us. I was thinking some of us are attuned to the magic. And of course, some people will turn around and say that makes us naive and it means that we're idealists or whatever. But it's greater than that. And I know that we both share a mutual interest in magical realism and people like Italo Calvino and Marquez. And I'm thinking about the magical realism of Marquez, and his 100 Years of Solitude and how magic just seems to come in. And it does it in your books. But again, it's fascinating, isn't it? The way in which the future seems to feed the past and makes us creative. And I'm reminded here of J.B. Priestley came up with the term future influencing past. And we know that the great author Philip K. Dick, again, that we are both mutual admirers of, argued that many of his stories, he wrote them now, but he then experienced the circumstances in his own future. Now, funnily enough, Sarah was just mentioning when we were about to start the discussion, before the three of us were discussing this, and Sarah came in with something fascinating about the things that are happening to her at the moment with her book and everything. So, Sarah, could you just come in on that?
I was just mentioning to Anthony that I've actually been reading quite a lot of novels recently, and my book is going to be half fiction and half non-fiction, because I think that fiction has this power to engage the reader in this first-hand experience of the story that you're trying to tell. So each chapter of my book is followed with this narrative section, which kind of, I suppose, creatively encodes the information that's in the research material that I have. And I've been reading recently Norman Mailer's Ancient Evenings. And it was really weird because once I finished my book, I started reading Ancient Evenings, and there's weirdly some really similar elements, at least in the story of Ancient Evenings, to my book. And then not only that, I do these lecture clubs that are all about Egyptology, and even each session of Egyptology that I was booking, the following chapter that I would read would be about the subject that would be explained in the next chapter. So, for example, I booked a talk about mirrors in ancient Egypt, which, as you can imagine, is fairly niche. And then the next chapter that I read was all about how reality was perceived through mirrors in ancient Egypt. So I thought that was pretty weird.
Well, what made it even stranger was that a few days before you announced about the whole reading Ancient Evenings, I was preparing books to go on holiday, and one of the books I picked out was Ancient Evenings. So clearly we have these wheels within wheels, and of course everybody know, if you follow my posts on Facebook as well, when I arrived on the island of Symi, and Symi itself had an awful lot of synchronicities which I've mentioned in my books, which we won't go into now, but effectively when I got there, the first night I was on Symi, the island, there was a yacht with the word Archon written on the top. And of course, we all know how the Archons have great fun with us here. But anyway, Mike, just going back now a little bit. So we'll go through a few ideas. Sure. But one of the things I'm always intrigued about in terms of your writing is what influences you. Your writing is extraordinary. It's not only extraordinary in the sense of the magical realism of the stories in Falling from Trees, but also the gritty New York realism of your new book, The Angry Ones. Mm-hmm. So clearly, are you writing, is it autobiographical? Is it more? Or where does it come from?
Yeah, I think it really depends. So, Falling from Trees, there's some cloaked domestic stories in there. You'll notice there are stories of, husband and wife and child. But I take it on a whole new level. And the reason for that was I wanted to introduce an idea of a time loop or the idea of precognition, but not get wrapped around the technical aspect of it. I wanted it to have a very human feel. And I wanted there to be an epiphany or an emotion that was at the center of Falling from Trees. So those began with, and I'll get to the hated ones in just a bit, but those began with, I had mentioned to you that I studied with Thomas Nagel, and I also studied with Derek Parfit, who was... Can
you just explain quickly, just for the watchers and the listeners, who Thomas Nagel was and what he's famous for?
Sure. So Thomas Nagel, I don't know if he's still alive. He was a philosopher of mind, professor. He taught at NYU. He also taught in the law school as well. He's most famously known for writing the essay, What Is It Like to Be a Bat?, which is probably one of the most famous, philosophy essays. The idea there being you could have all of the data, you could have all of the facts, you could have all of the details, but you wouldn't know what it's like to be a bat. And as I know you're very much aware, you have the reductionist side of the philosophy of mind, Richard Dawkins and his coterie of folks. And then you have people like Derek Parfit, like John Seale, Thomas Nagel, who feel that there is a qualia that is not reducible. There is some subjectivity. The very fact that I could say that indicates there must be something there. Of course, it's much deeper than that. One of the things that when I took the class with Derek Parfit, who was a great teacher, he was an Oxford teacher, but he was at NYU at the time. I think they just shared professors. He had this idea of a thought experiment. So I wrote my paper, philosophy of mind paper, on a thought experiment. I'll briefly describe it. So if I teletransport to another place, Do I teletransport my being? Do I break my being down into particles? Or do I send just the information to the other side? If I send the information to the other side, I said in my story, what if the machine breaks down? Now I have two of me, right? Is that other person that's been transported just as equally as me as I am? They will have all my memories. They will have all of my brain structure, all of my physicality. What I said is, as soon as that person wakes up and walks away, they will be a new person. They will have a new experience. So subjectivity, it's not just in your brain, it's in your negotiation with experience with the world, is what I was saying. And so I think that's kind of where Falling from Trees was inspired, is this idea of thought experiments. What if? Take an idea, play with it, but don't forget about the emotional component. Try to inject some of yourself, longing, fear, love. These must be aspects of the stories. While the hated ones is very, very different. Mm-hmm. I mean, it's coming out, on some level, it's a little scary to put that out in the world. But really, if I look at that came from a place of remembering painful moments, humiliations, demonstrating the stupidity of people. And it's what makes those stories very powerful, for me, having written it, is that describing the danger, not holding back. It couldn't be more opposite from Falling from Trees and Climbing Time. This, effusive love thing, as opposed to destructive, ignorant, racist, violent people.
But I think that's where the massive contrast. I suppose I'm unusual in that I was reading both Falling from Trees and The Angry Ones at the same time, and it's almost as if the person writing the books is so totally opposite in any way. There's the kind of visceral power of The Angry Ones. There are sequences in there that are burned on my mind even now, that I think, good Lord, that is just such brave writing. And getting the idea of what it was like in late 70s, early 80s New York, and the characters. I mean, one of the stories that really upset me was the one about the guy that got the tattoo who liked the band, and he was a really odd character, and he goes and kills himself, and you go, I didn't see that coming. And I was reminded all the time of, I've been to New York a few times, and I could get that feeling of New York when I first went there was this element of danger, which doesn't seem to be there anymore. But I was reminded all the time of the movie The Warriors, which came out around about 1977. But there were always also elements there of Saturday Night Fever, the hard man trying to get the girl by becoming a disco dancer.
Right.
And which I thought was wonderful. And the focus on the shoes,
right,
which was great. But there's also this underlying theme of Catholic guilt, and the relationships between the different groups, and the racism between the Italians and the African Americans as well, being friends, and then everything else. It was almost like West Side Story. Was that autobiographical? Were those elements of that autobiographical from your life?
Sure. I mean, there's always when I write something, it's not. I do write journalism stuff too. I do write for newspapers, and that is different. You do have to stick to the facts. But these stories, the germ of them is autobiographical often. And then I don't feel I have to stick to any factual detail. I may compress, as authors do. You want to bring together. So, for instance, there's the story of the roller voice in The Hated Ones. Technically, it never happened, really. It's a composite of a lot of things. Someone had mentioned to me something about roller going to a roller rink, which was popular when I was a kid, and it fascinated me. So I looked up some things and I cobbled together a story. But really, what's at the essence of that story, Anthony, is that person who is telling the story is not aware, and I think this is very relatable, of the lack of self-esteem he has. When you're younger, you don't have a vocabulary for it. And especially if you came from a rough and tumble place where you're just ill-equipped. You're ill-equipped in every way to understand what's going on, you lack, but you don't know exactly why, because you're surrounded by people who lack. And that there's a lot of time travel in that notion as well, is going back to that person. And as Sarah was saying earlier, you're empathizing with who that person is. Now that person happens to be me. My hope is that people will read that and feel themselves. They'll remember themselves. They'll remember their naivete. They'll remember their innocence and the stupid things that they've done, their mistakes, and they'll feel empathy for themselves on some level. But yeah, that was it did feel dangerous to write that book and to put it out there, because a lot of people don't know that aspect of my growing up. And it's a bit of a hot potato to put out into the world. But, why write something if you're not willing to risk anything?
I think that was the power of it when I was reading it. I mean, a lot of people don't know a great deal about my background, particularly, but I'm very, very working class Liverpool, So my background was not quite street gangs, but it was hanging around street corners, exactly the same way as your characters do. I have the kind of the Catholic thing in the background as well. And I related so strongly to it because it was my life, for instance. And again, it was extraordinary. You have the short story Close to the Edge. Now we're about 15 years difference in age, but Close to the Edge was and still is my favorite album of all time. I listen to that album at least once a month, and I have done for the last nearly 50 years. I know every single note and every single nuance of that. And I'm reading your story and I'm going, my God, he's basing a story on Close to the Edge. And it's like a shiver goes down your spine. Yeah. And I'm then relating. And then when I start reading your book, The Angry Ones, you're writing about me when I was interested in Close to the Edge. I had friends like so similar to the characters you characterize, and there'll be people watching this who will know who they are. Because they will, I'm not going to mention names here, but there are characters, and there's the friends we lost, the people that were injured, people that were damaged by it. Mm-hmm. But your point about the lostness and immaturity that comes through in the stories is so powerful. It really worked for me. Mm-hmm. I felt like I was living my own life. And that's the power of your stories. Now, so we've had the influences of your background and everything else as well. But who do you consider to be the major influences in your very interesting writing style? Who is it that is the guys that were or the writers that made you think this is the way I want to write?
Well, thank you for all those lovely things you said. I really appreciate that. I think there are some people that are key. I think it's healthy to reread Ernest Hemingway. I mean, putting aside whatever his his machismo and all that stuff, but it's sort of like reading Hemingway is like dieting. It's getting rid of the fat in your language and just the terseness of and brevity. I found that reading Hemingway was very, very crucial. Of course, I'm not writing like Hemingway, but just the stripping down the language. So that's something that I try to do. I think John Fonte was very influential to my writing. Like you, though, I have many, many varied interests. So I'm interested, Aldous Huxley has been very influential in
Can we expand on the Huxley thing? Because that could be quite interesting.
Sure. I think my interest in Huxley, it really goes back to, taking LSD when I was 18, I would say. But also what interested me about Huxley is his range of knowledge. I mean, he writes on science, he writes on literature, he writes on world religions, and with such authority and with such elegance. I feel like maybe I only, a few folks like you and me, I think I've read everything by Huxley. I've read his novels. I know the trajectory from the kind of cynic, his early novels like Chrome Yellow, which is a great novel. And then the breakdown that he has when his wife Maria dies, and he gets more spiritual, and he gets more introspective. And his essays are brilliant. Wordsworth in the Tropics. What a great essay. Mm-hmm. So there are many, many influences that have come into my writing, and I can't really say exactly, I think what am I writing about? And that's maybe where some of the styles will manifest a little differently. Sarah was talking about this idea of writing fiction and weaving, nonfiction and fiction. And why do we do that? And that's something that Huxley does brilliantly. In Gray Eminence, the book, it's about, I won't get into the names because I can't remember them, frankly, but he describes in great detail the facts of a period of time, but he also weaves in a lot of narrative because he wasn't there. So he couldn't have known on Tuesday morning that the sun was shining through and someone looked out their window. He wouldn't have known that, but he has that. I love that ability to pack in fact, but not to overwhelm someone with fact, to weave narrative and fact together so that you're learning as you're reading. And there's something for me that's very satisfying. Aldous Huxley, I'm still, I just wrote a story for the Psychedelic Press. Well, not just, it's been a while now. And it's as if Aldous Huxley wrote a letter describing his magical relationship with the Beatles, that there's some symbiosis between them, and that when he heard the Beatles, this is not his kind of music, Aldous Huxley. He would not like that music, but he heard something in their music that was like Palestrina, that was like Bach. There was something, those harmonies, which really, if you trace the Beatles back, their harmonies, they go back to really gospel harmonies. Mm-hmm. Really, the Louvin brothers, and that kind of what they were going after. And anyhow, when Aldous dies, he dies the same day that John F. Kennedy dies. Mm-hmm. In a very different circumstance. His wife is reading the Tibetan Book of the Dead. John F. Kennedy is shot. But this commingling of his hearing the Beatles on the radio when he's sick, and the shot, the bullet that kills JFK, and they all kind of conspire to inject Aldous Huxley as a being into the Beatles and into their music. And it's as if he colorizes them, because they go from black and white now into, when you get to Rubber Soul and you get to those suddenly there's this psychedelic gleam in a way. And so I explore that, it's, of course it's completely made up. But it's something I was thinking about for a long time.
It isn't, because, as I say, growing up in the Merseyside area in the late 1950s, 1960s, everything was black and white until after Kennedy was shot, and then suddenly everything became colour. And of course, in those days, growing up in the Merseyside area, we thought we were the centre of the world. Everything, right. From the sport to the music to the art, everything was coming out of our major city, which was extraordinary. But I think your parallel there with Huxley and the Beatles is extraordinary, and I can see an absolutely wonderful story coming out of that, really, because Huxley was an amazing writer. And Sarah, did you post something recently? Isn't there a TV series on Brave New World at the moment?
Oh yeah, I posted about my disappointment in Brave New World.
Oh, that's too bad.
Series. I mean, once you've seen one orgy, you've seen them all. It gets a bit tiresome towards the end. But I think it's very, very sort of cliche. There's this like angry bloke listening to Radiohead on headphones at the end of the world, which I really hope doesn't happen. There's some elements of it. It looks really beautiful and everything, but it's quite simplistic, and it's a bit of a sort of dumbing down, I think, personally, of the Brave New World thing. But I mean, everything you're just saying there, Mike, really makes me think of, how stories do have this ability, like neuroscientists who've researched people reading fiction have scanned neural pathways and seen that new neural pathways are formed when people read fiction and stories. So actually, part of your consciousness follows these people on their journeys, and in a sense you've kind of lived their experiences. And I think, some of my favorite authors are people like Vladimir Nabokov and Günter Grass, and I wonder whether I was saying to you before we went live, whether people seem to have less interest in reading fiction these days. And actually, I wonder whether this is the reason why we've become more divided as a society, because we have less of an ability to empathize with a character that's been brought up in different circumstances. Because for all the sort of right-on, politically correct ideology that's going on at the moment, actually there isn't much empathy for people that have formed different worldviews, because they've been brought up in situations where it would have been impossible to have cultivated that level of open-mindedness that someone who has more privilege has access to, essentially.
I absolutely agree.
I think it's an extraordinary point. Mike, please continue.
No, I was going to say I read, and when I read, I get emotionally touched, and I not that I want to be sad all the time, but I like to read books that are about pain, and the reason is, and not sadomasochism. Let me be clear about that. When you're moved by someone's suffering, and you just feel like you're a part of something bigger. You're.
The truth is, good characters are incredibly complex. Like, I think about a book like Lolita by Nabokov, and how I wonder whether that would ever make, be published these days, because it's so incredibly controversial. And yet when you read Lolita, you empathize with the main character, and the main character is an incredibly perverse, complex, traumatized, man. But there's a very sort of complex, weird story. And you can also see how elements of Lolita have become cultural memes and influenced taste, and probably less than good behavior on the part of a lot of people that have read it. It's creativity is hard to sort of sanitize it, because in reality we're incredibly complex, perverse, weird people.
Funnily enough, one of the first people to contact me when Itlad, my first book, came out, was the visiting professor, I think maybe at New York University. I'm trying to remember his name now, but he was an expert in Nabokov. And he gave me various links to novels written by Nabokov that had elements of my cheating the ferryman hypothesis and the idea of the eternal return and the eternal recurrence. And funnily enough, I decided when I was on holiday this time round that I would read fiction rather than fact and everything else. And I read a book, is it Lionel Shriver, called, I think is All It Is. And if you've read that, it's one of the most visceral books about somebody dying of cancer. And it is so, you empathize, because you laugh because it's written brilliantly. But it is horrific at the same time. And Sarah's point there about empathy and reading novels, I'd never thought about that before, but it is. You become somebody else, don't you? And you see it from their worldview. Only fiction can do that and can see that world. And that's why I think the power of The Hated Ones that you've got there is that I felt I was running the streets of New York at the time. I was there. I was really genuinely there. And I think it's how short story format seems to work perfectly then, because all your short stories are themed in one way and they carry through. And one of the series of short stories that you had in Falling from Trees that really intrigued me of all the characters you created is the character Smith.
Mm.
And where did that idea come from?
Mm. I'm not exactly sure. I'm not sure where it came from, but what I wanted to do with Smith was to transition him. So you see there are 3 stories.
Yeah.
In each story, he's different. He's a different incarnation of a person, which is really what I wanted to go for. I should say 2 things. There was the button in the Smith stories that you had a guest on, and I just can't remember his name, but he had this object. There was this object. That's it, exactly. And you kind of spawned this connections with people that I now have because their stuff is in my stories.
Well, as Myron Dial said in his review of your book, Myron, that's been on this show 2 or 3 times, said that your stories were almost his life. He was feeling them. And clearly, Smith just seems to be this pan-dimensional being that seems to be existing in human form through 3 very different stories. Quite extraordinary.
He's like a egregorial in a way, right?
Yeah.
It's sort of like that, as you described. Sometimes there's a true thing that happens, and then I build a story around it. I was on the Upper East Side in Manhattan. I lived on the Upper East Side in Manhattan. And there's a walkway that's near the river. And it was a summer night. I'm walking down that. There are people just kind of strolling with, holding hands with baby carriages. And I see this thing that looks like a dresser drawer. And it's on a cart being pushed. Very strange. And there's a guy he's working the machine, this thing. He says to me, "Come here, I will show you something." Now, New York, you hardly go, you got to worry, right? But he looked harmless enough, and the situation was very public. So I walk over, and what he has is a homemade telescope that he has built with these lenses, and he's put this in a dresser drawer. And so I looked through the thing, and I could see the lens. I could see Saturn pretty clearly, and that was really the genesis of those stories. Was really that the epiphany and the magic of that moment. It sort of it spawned the Smith stories.
Because the bit in the Smith stories, about the telescope,
exactly,
that really happened. That is magical, because the seeing of Saturn and how you described that was just simply wonderful. I mean, guys, don't think I'm waxing lyrical because I'm playing up to my... These stories are exceptional. I cannot stress how exceptional they are. They're just magical in some way. And of course that leads us, because I'm very aware of time here, in the sense that we got so many topics to talk about. But the other writer that I feel, and I'm sure is true, that you have been influenced by or fascinated by is, of course, Philip K. Dick. Mm-hmm. And can you tell us a little bit about your interest in Dick and how Dick has influenced you? It always sounds vaguely pornographic when you say that, doesn't it?
Yes.
You follow the logic, yeah?
Yeah, well, we friends would jokingly call ourselves dickheads, but that being that's aside from the point here. Well, the interesting thing is the way I discovered. I had read The Man in the High Castle, and maybe another book, and then and this is 30-ish years ago or more. I had I was at a book table in Manhattan, and I talked to someone. I just, had a striking conversation who had read Philip K. Dick, and he's from the Bay Area, which is where Philip K. Dick is from. And we actually, Greg and I became very good friends. I read, Philip K. Dick has, let's just say, maybe 12 or so just amazing novels. I mean, he has other great writing and short stories, but there are about 12 that are just absolute gems. And I actually wanted to pursue my master's in literature. I wanted to write about Philip K. Dick, but my thesis advisor said, I don't know who that is. Though,
Wow.
Yeah, we can't do that. I can't help you there. So I switched gears to write about Henry James. But I snuck some Philip K. Dick in there, if you noticed. We talked about the thesis. But I think that just the ideas, which is throughout all of my writing, the idea of time loops, of questioning reality, what is real. And that's what Philip K. Dick, the ideas are great, but at the essence of all of his writing is, what is it like to be human? And are the robots more human than the humans? If he projects himself into some imagined situation, which then becomes the primary reality. So playing with this notion of reality. So, and I would put Philip K. Dick in the category of Borges and Calvino and Stanislaw Lem.
Well, as Ursula Le Guin said, Philip K. Dick was the American Borges.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. And what I liked about, because I know we've also talked about Calvino and Borges, and I inserted them, I snuck them in a little bit here and there. There's the Book of Sands is in one of the stories. I think it's The Unending. So I snuck Borges's The Book of Sands, which is this book that's constantly changing. You open it up and it's sort of a living, dynamic thing. I wanted to get Borges in there. But also the thing about Borges is, first of all, he knew everything. He read everything. And yet he could wield this amazing knowledge in a short story so brief, a 2-page story. He could, incorporate, it could be a scene of a kind of fight scene, in the rural parts of Argentina. But it was so epic, and it was the entire the center of the universe. Ironically, Borges got me interested in Icelandic sagas because he was fascinated with that stuff.
Was he?
Yeah, he was fascinated with that stuff, and he writes about it, and that got me interested in exploring and learning. And I've read a bunch of the sagas, and not just the sagas, but I learned about Snorri Sturluson, who was one of the he wrote a lot of the sagas, but there's an interesting stories about him as well. Iceland has the first non-written, it's non-Latin literature, and it's not as well recognized as it should be, and a great storytelling people. So anyway, that's what I think what attracted me and influenced me specifically in Falling from Trees is Borges and Calvino. The idea you can write a story in a page. You can write a story in a page. Now, that doesn't mean it's a guarantee story. You can be as brief as you can be. The idea is to get the story in there. Hemingway has that famous 6-word story. Baby shoes never worn for sale. So, is the idea is powerful, right? And I had this discussion with someone about the brevity of the stories. Some of the critiques about Falling from Trees were the stories are too short. But, my idea was to get in there, flesh out the idea, humanize the idea, show the relationships, put something on the line, fear, love, whatever the case might be, but do it briefly. I could probably expand the Smith stories to a whole book. That could be its own book. But I just kind of, I moved on. And I think in the world we live in, Sarah, do people read as much? Do they Do you want to give them something to read? They don't even stand on the bank line anymore. You don't have to, right? Give them something to read as.
I was just going to say, like TV, film, Netflix series have really taken over from reading fiction as a entertainment. And during lockdown, I got really into reading fiction again, which I've always enjoyed more than reading nonfiction, actually. But one of the things I wanted to bring up just before we stop is this potential of fiction, especially to be magical, and the idea of words being magical, of being spells, that you can create a future by writing a novel, because you are in a sense creating an imaginal version of a new reality. And I think that books have almost this like oracular dimension to them, where they create the future, and artists, whether they be writers or musicians or filmmakers, have this responsibility, I think, to create a, if not perfect future, a good future, a future that's really consciously created, that's like divinely inspired, because I think we're polluted now by a lot of crappy ideas.
You're right. And I mean, literature has its origins in the bardic tradition. You go back, and these were meant to be sung, and they were meant to be entertaining. And you knew, when people recited in the bardic tradition, you knew you were in a state, in a different mode. So I think that's true, and that's always in the back of my mind. I mean, reality is what we make of it. And it comes from the imagination. It comes from what's going into our consciousness, into our unconsciousness. So
and our lives really are a fiction, because we are only what we tell ourselves we are. And you could meet someone that has a very similar life trajectory to you, but they will be a different person according to the story they've told themselves about the various things that have happened to them. I think that I've always been really into fiction, so I've often thought of my life as being like a kind of, I'm in a movie or a book or some way, or seen meaning in small events or occurrences, but different people, they can be affected in different ways, but our personality is really kind of habits that form according to the story that we tell ourselves about life.
Isn't it the famous one? I don't know how famous it is, but as I recall, Borges wrote a story called Borges and Me, and the idea of the kind of bifurcation of his personality as a writer. And he also has that story of the guy rewriting Don Quixote, doesn't he? And there's the mixtures there that's going on. And then you have the Garden of the Forking Paths, and the idea of multiple times where there's multiple outcomes to things. And I think I think we're really onto something really interesting here. It's unfortunate we're just coming to the end, because I think this, of all the shows we've done, this one is probably the most interesting in terms of ideas and spinning ideas out here. But I'm thinking here, my concept of the egregorial, Sarah's comment about that we create our own realities in some way. But I think you're quite right, Sarah, when you're saying, people bomb out on Netflix. And like, for instance, when you watch, I'm working my way through at the moment, The Man in the High Castle, the Amazon TV series. But it's not like reading a book. You're not in the head. You don't get into the heads of the characters in the same way. When there's the time slip where the Japanese guy suddenly finds himself underneath the Embarcado flyover. In the book, that hits you so quickly.
I think
it's always thrown away in the TV series.
When you read a book, you have to bring something of yourself to the experience.
Good point.
And it's so much more intimate, and there's definitely a give and take relationship between the writer and the reader. And just like life, one person, when you've read a book and you're like, this is the most amazing book I've ever read, and you try and lend it to someone, they're like, not bothered. That's like how reality works as well, because for one person, a book will touch them deeply and mean so much, and to another person, it's literally no experience had at all.
Right.
Because I found that, my favorite writer is John Fowles, and there was a sequence in the Magus that happens where you suddenly find something out that you weren't aware of. And even now, I know I was on the number 77 bus outside Rains Park in South London, sitting on the front seat when that incident happened. And that was in 1977, 77, 78, maybe 1980. And it's still in my mind now because I felt it was an affront to me.
Right.
And that's great writing, isn't it, Mike? And that's what you do.
Well, thank you. I mean, take a look at Philip K. Dick. You see a lot of times his character is a very common person. He works in a record store, which Philip K. Dick worked in a record store in Berkeley. And this is a very common person who suddenly becomes at the center of saving the world. Unfortunately, in the films, which many of are good, I'm not saying that they're not good, but they become kind of cop movies, cop chasing, this kind of thing. Because how do you get what Philip K. Dick is after? How do you explore the nature of identity in a filmic way? How do you explore the nature of consciousness? Yes, we do get some of that in Total Recall and some of the other films, but when as Sarah said, it really sinks into you cognitively and emotionally. When you read the character, you relate to the character, you relate to the humanness of that character, which, I think Philip K. Dick, I don't know if he gets enough credit for that, there is in many ways, more than really Borges and Calvino, his people are more real.
You get a sense of, when you read a book, you're making contact with that pure inspiration of the author. And just in life, when you talk to people in conversations, people often get the wrong end of the stick. Or, for example, if you do a piece of art yourself or you take some photographs, every person has their own taste on which one they think is the best. So It's interesting that when you read a book, that for some people, a small thing can be so meaningful and feel almost like an initiation. And for other people, it's just like words on a page that have no engaging quality to them. So I think that if you want to have that contact with divine inspiration, to read like an author's own words is the sort of truest sense of understanding that you can get. And then, maybe if a person really gets and really understands a book and then makes it into a film, they can be amazing. But quite often, like you say, someone will pick up on the kind of drama cop element of Philip K. Dick and make a film about that and miss the sort of deeper esoteric nature of the book.
Well, it was almost like, wasn't it, with Blade Runner, how people forget the original title of the book, Do Androids Dream of
Electric Sheep. Yeah.
And of course, there's a whole theme in that book about Deckard wanting to have his own electric sheep, as I recall. And there's the whole concept of Mercerism in that book, the religious movement of Mercer, where Mercer gets beaten on the television and everybody empathizes with his pain. That was completely missed in the film. But that's another level of how clever Philip K. Dick was writing that book. It was on so many different levels. But they couldn't have brought that in because it wouldn't have worked in the same way. Now, for instance, in terms of Philip K. Dick, as you know, in my book, The Man Who Remembered the Future, when I wrote a book on Philip K. Dick, I was intrigued by how he splits his personalities. Like in Valis, the way he has Philip K. Dick, the author, he has Phil, the narrator, and he has Horse Lover Fat.
Right.
But they're all him.
Right.
And the way in which you get into somebody's head. And I think that's why your book, The Angry Ones, is so great, because you get into the head of the narrator in such a powerful way that you feel sorry for him, but you also get very irritated by him because he's such a prat.
Yeah.
Sometimes. And he's such a sexist. And this, when he was stealing the money from his own mother and then frames his father because he's stealing money from his mother. And yet then he goes to church and he's working with a priest in the church, and he doesn't see the mismatch.
Right. Yeah. No, that's exactly the point is to reveal all of that. Even so, the one thing I say is, though they are hated, and I quote Shakespeare, I don't remember exactly, they are but loved. And they're these pathetic characters, these pathetic fools, really. And we see more than they do. That was a very important thing in writing that, showing people, you as the reader knew more than the person in the story, and kind of taking the veil off of his thinking. But I'm glad you said all that, because that is exactly, I wanted people to feel uncomfortable. I didn't want that character to be likable all the time. I wanted him to be kind of absurd and so unaware of the lack of logic. When you hear the Hated One's characters described, one guy wears Nazi gear. I mean, this is in the projects of New York City. I mean, this would be the most unlikely place to wear this stuff. That is based on a true person.
Right.
And being unaware of just those, you have such hatred, you don't even know why you have it. And that was key. I think I wrote for my college essay, I said something like, I grew up in the projects of New York City. This doesn't mean that I was a gangster. It just means that I had friends who were, which was, I was not in the gang. I knew them. How could you not know them? But at the same time, I wanted to show their fragility too. The character Junior. And when I encounter him at the end, it's the last story, the pirate Jesus. And this kind of effusive honesty, as well as much as there's lying and deception and lack of knowledge of the world, there is this sort of immediate openness that you get with the people that I grew up with. And I'm sure you could relate to that, Anthony, coming from Liverpool. They'll just cry. They'll tell you they love you. They'll tell you they hate you without all these veils of intellectual kind of cloakery and
But what I loved was the way in which he's the hard man on the streets and everything else, and his mates are all hard, but his mum's calling him from the balcony, and there's this amazing contrast of the hard man out there, but his mum is telling him off for doing things, and there's this beautiful juxtaposition of we've all been there, haven't we? You go out and you're a hard kid and you're hanging around the street corners and all night, and you come home and you're terrified of your mother because,
right, because she's terrifying.
Yeah, absolutely. So we're getting towards the end now. We're going to have you back. We've just scratched the surface here. But what projects are you on to at the moment? What are you working on?
Well, so thank you. I have a few things going right now. One of them is I've been doing interviews with American Indigenous, artists, writers, scholars, and just amazing stories. It started about a year ago. I met a chief of a local Taino tribe, Taino from the Caribbean. And it just blew my mind and opened my mind in such a way to investigate. Let me understand their stories. They're all different. This is not monolithic. Which nation or tribe are you from? Do you speak the language? The incredible atrocities that the American government set upon people. I mean, it's not well known enough, I don't think. The genocide of an entire people. And so my goal is to tell their story. So I want to be the conduit and share it in the various outlets that I write for. But that's with a view to putting together a collection. And finally, I think, as you know, because you're a fan of Peter Rowan, through my music interviews, I got to talk to Peter Rowan, and I've gotten to meet him. And he's just a very special person. Very spiritual, always was. But he has some. I'm writing about the spirituality of Peter Rowan, and how even bluegrass has its roots in gospel and spiritual music. But of course, Peter Rowan takes it to writing songs that are about Buddhism, about compassion and kindness and cultivating those things. And he's a really great and full of great stories too.
Because he originally was with two of his brothers, wasn't he? When he was at the band The Rowans, was that with his brothers?
That wasn't, he played with Bill Monroe, which is, the father of bluegrass. And then he played with pretty much the greatest bluegrass players of our time. But he played with Jerry Garcia in Old and in the Way, David Grisman. He played with Jerry Garcia on 2 albums. And he kind of went from this bluegrass player.
Did he play on Cats Over the Moon, the Garcia solo album?
I don't think so. I don't think so. Yeah, but they were very significant to each other. Garcia loved his songwriting, and they had a special relationship. And I think I've just been so inspired by Peter. I'm not writing a biography. I'm writing it's really a time loop, and how we've met, Peter and I, and it's very Buddhist. We've met in different lifetimes and have been sort of cycling through, time and the cosmos, kind of reconnecting, sometimes in the abandoned factory buildings of Long Island City, where I grew up. And I don't know, I've done a lot of interviews, but he just inspired me, and his story, the more I looked into it, the kind of person he is, the humility that he has, it really, I just find him so inspiring, and I want to share with the world his story, his music, my reaction, my love and admiration for it. So far, he's read parts of it. I'm not sure if he read the whole thing, and he said, it's beautiful. Now, I could stop right there.
Wow. Just when you have your musical hero say something like that.
I wanted to cry. I really did.
Yeah.
I mean, and he probably knows that too. But anyway, that's a long way off. I'm now kind of proposing it to publishers. It's a little bit of a hybrid thing. So it's music, it's spirituality. They may have a hard time finding the right category where to place it.
Well, you could create your own category there. I mean, that's important. It makes it unique.
That's exactly what I think. I really do. I think maybe there should be more of this.
Funnily enough, one of the things that when in the Angry Ones, when one of the characters is analysing the lyrics of Yes and John Anderson, and the discussion they have whether they prefer Bill Bruford's jazz riffs, or was it Pete Banks? Was it Peter Banks?
Yes. Well, they're on and off.
And the difference. And funnily enough, myself and my friends used to do that. And there was a friend of mine years ago. He actually used to write down the Yes lyrics to try and understand what they were. And it was almost like, Anderson was just throwing things up in the air and coming down and not making any sense. But funnily enough, on your inspiration from reading that book, I was reading it again with Close to the Edge on headphones. Mm. And I suddenly realized that the lyrics weren't as nonsensical as I first thought. There is, Topographic Oceans, there was kind of nonsense in there. But in Close to the Edge, there really is a storyline and there is a message. And it's profoundly spiritual, isn't it?
Yeah, Close to the Edge, down by the river. And it took us to a place, guys like you and me, who were from a different kind of city, gritty world, into this beatific fantasy, which is, it was satisfying to me.
Well, I related so strongly when you said the opening bits of Close to the Edge, when you got all the sounds coming in and the dripping water and the only other effect I know of that in my love of music is Santana Caravanserai.
Yeah.
Where that has a similar kind of, sort of desert feel.
Right.
Music.
Buzzing, clicking. Yeah. But, Anthony, I'm always secretly really writing music criticism in a way. That's always a theme in the writing. And it's just an excuse to write on some level. There's always kind of music. My love of music is throughout all of my writing. But not necessarily as criticism, more as just joy and love. But sneaking it in there,
Absolutely. Because Sarah might come in here because she's in a music studio at the moment in Brighton, aren't you?
I see. Yeah, you're at the controls there, Sarah.
Yeah, I just came because I had to borrow a microphone, so I'm not recording my album or anything.
There will be a chance. There will be a chance. Right. Okay, Mike, I know that you have another appointment to go to. So can you quickly tell how people can contact you and get hold of the book? And guys, read this. It's brilliant.
Well, first of all, thank you very much, Anthony and Sarah. I really appreciate it. Lovely talking to you. Lots of fun. And you're right. We have to do more of this. I would say the best place to go is to fallingfromtrees.info. So it's not .com, fallingfromtrees.info. I'm soon going to be collapsing everything into my name because now I have too many books to have websites for all of them. But please go there. You'll have contact info. I have blogs of some of my newspaper and magazine articles there as well. And I'm really looking forward to coming back on, Anthony, and we'll take as long as we need next time.
We will, absolutely. Thank you very much. And as always, thanks, Sarah, for your continued assistance on this, because we're really creating something special here. So
I look forward to starting our book club. I think that's going to
absolutely. I think that's the next exercise we need. So let's talk about this over the next few days, see if we can make this happen. Okay, everybody, thank you very much for listening in, and we'll see you again soon. Okay, bye-bye.
Thank you.